The taste of salt on my lips was the first thing I noticed when I woke up that morning, long before I opened my eyes to the pale sunlight filtering through the curtains of the hotel room. I lay there perfectly still, my heart beat slow and steady, and I realized with a strange kind of detachment that the salt was from tears I had shed sometime in the night, tears I didn't remember crying. Beside me, the sheets were cool and empty, and I felt a rush of relief so powerful it almost made me sick. He was gone. The man whose name I had whispered in the dark, whose skin had been pressed against mine just hours ago, had slipped away like a thief in the dawn, and I was grateful for it. My name is Elena, and for the past 4 years, I had been living a life that most people would describe as charm. I was 28 years old, living in a beautiful apartment in the heart of the city with a man who loved me with a devotion that was both my anchor and my cage. His name was Daniel, and he was the kind of good that made you believe in the fundamental decency of the world. He remembered to buy my favorite brand of coffee without being asked. He left little notes for me on the bathroom mirror, and he looked at me sometimes with an expression of such pure, uncomplicated love that it felt like a physical weight pressing down on my chest. He was an architect, a man who built structures of steel and glass, but whose own heart was made of something far more fragile. We had met in the chaos of a mutual friend's birthday party, a loud, crowded affair in a bar that smelled of spilled beer and cheap perfume. I had been standing near the exit, overwhelmed by the noise, when he approached me with 2 glasses of water and a shy smile. He wasn't the kind of man I usually noticed. He was too earnest, too kind, his eyes holding a warmth that felt unfamiliar and a little bit dangerous. I was used to sharp edges and witty banter, men who kept you guessing and left you wanting more. Daniel was an open book, and from the very first page, he was declaring his intentions. We talked for hours that night, not about anything profound, but about everything that mattered. He listened to me, truly listened, as if every word I spoke was a secret he had been waiting his whole life to hear. By the end of the night, I felt seen in a way I never had before, and it terrified me. Our relationship progressed with a gentle certainty that felt both reassuring and suffocating. He moved into my apartment within a year, and slowly, his things began to merge with mine. His collection of Architectural Digest magazines piled up on the coffee table. His favorite mug found a permanent home in the cabinet, and the scent of his cedar and sandalwood cologne became as familiar to me as my own breath. We fell into a rhythm, a comfortable, predictable pattern of weekdays and weekends, of grocery shopping and dinner with friends, of lazy Sunday mornings with the newspapers spread out across the bed. It was, by all accounts, a perfect life. But perfection, I was beginning to learn, has a way of breeding its own kind of discontent. It was like living in a beautifully furnished room with no windows. Everything was lovely, everything was in its place, but there was no air. I couldn't see the sky, I couldn't feel the wind, and slowly, insidiously, I began to feel like I was suffocating. It wasn't Daniel's fault. It was mine. I carried within me a restlessness that I couldn't name, a hunger for something I couldn't identify. It was a ghost that had haunted me since I was a girl. A whisper that told me there was more to life than this, that I was meant for something bigger, something wilder, something that would set my blood on fire. Daniel's love was a warm, steady flame, but I craved a wildfire. I craved the kind of passion that burned you up from the inside, the kind that left scars. I had never told him this, of course. How could I? How do you explain to a man who has given you everything that what he's given you just isn't enough? The dissatisfaction grew like a vine, wrapping itself around my thoughts, its thorns pricking at my contentment. I started to notice things I hadn't before. The way Daniel chewed his food slowly and methodically. The way he always left the toilet seat up. The way he hummed the same tuneless melody when he was working on his blueprints. These were small things, insignificant things, but they became magnified in my mind. Symbols of a life that was becoming too small for me. I found myself picking fights over nothing, inventing grievances just to feel something, just to break the suffocating stillness. And then I met Julian. He wasn't a stranger. Not exactly. He was a freelance photographer who had been hired by the marketing firm, where I worked as a junior creative director. He was there to shoot a campaign for a new luxury watch, a project I was heading. The first time I saw him, he was kneeling on the floor of our studio, adjusting a light, his brow furrowed in concentration. He was all sharp angles and contained energy, dressed in black from head to toe, with a silver ring on his thumb and a faded tattoo peeking out from his sleeve. He was the antithesis of Daniel. Daniel. Where Daniel was light, Julian was shadow. Where Daniel was steady, Julian was a storm. Our first conversation was brief, purely professional. He asked about the creative direction. I explained the mood we were trying to capture, but when he looked at me, his gaze was different. It wasn't just polite interest, it was a deep, penetrating assessment, as if he were trying to see past my words, past my carefully constructed facade, to something underneath. It made my skin prickle with a strange, unsettling awareness. Over the next few weeks, our interactions became more frequent. We worked late nights in the studio, ordering takeout and going over proofs. We discovered a shared love for old black and white films and obscure jazz music. He would tell me stories about his travels, about shooting in war zones and remote villages, about the faces he had seen and the lives he had briefly touched. His world was vast and unpredictable, a stark contrast to the neatly ordered universe I inhabited with Daniel. I found myself drawn to him like a moth to a flame, fully aware of the danger, yet powerless to resist the pull. The first time he touched me, it was an accident. He was reaching for a light meter at the same time I was, and his hand brushed against mine. The contact was fleeting, barely a second, but a jolt of electricity shot through me, so sharp and unexpected that I gasped. He looked at me, his eyes dark and knowing, and a slow, deliberate smile spread across his face. In that moment, something shifted between us. The professional line we had been walking so carefully had been crossed, and there was no going back. After that, everything was charged with a new, dangerous energy. Every glance, every word, every accidental touch was loaded with unspoken meaning. We started staying later than we needed to, finding excuses to be alone together. We would sit in the darkened studio, listening to music, not talking, just existing in the same space, the air thick with tension. I would go home to Daniel, and he would kiss me on the forehead and ask about my day. And I would lie, smoothly and easily, the words falling from my lips without a second thought. I would tell him about the campaign, about the deadlines, about the mundane details. But I never mentioned Julian. I couldn't. Saying his name out loud in that apartment, in that life, would have been like admitting to a crime. The guilt was a constant, low-level hum in the back of my mind, but it was easily drowned out by the thrilling roar of anticipation. My life, which had felt so flat and colorless, was suddenly vibrant with secret color. Every text message from Julian was a tiny act of rebellion, a secret I held close to my heart. I became an expert at deception, at timing my phone calls, at erasing my browsing history, at constructing a seamless web of lies that allowed me to live two lives simultaneously. It was a Thursday evening, 3 weeks into the campaign, when it finally happened. We had finished the shoot early, and the rest of the team had gone home. It was just Julian and me in the studio, the city lights twinkling beyond the large windows. He was packing up his equipment, his movements precise and efficient, and I was sitting on the edge of the set, pretending to review shots on my laptop. The silence between us was deafening. "Elena," he said, his voice low. I looked up. He was standing a few feet away, his camera bag dangling from his hand. His expression was serious, the usual hint of a smirk gone. "I can't keep pretending this isn't happening," he said. My heart slammed against my ribs. What isn't happening? He took a step closer. This, us. The way you look at me. The way I can't stop thinking about you. I should have stopped him. I should have told him he was mistaken, that I was happy, that I was in love with someone else. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, I just sat there frozen, my breath caught in my throat. He closed the distance between us and knelt in front of me. He reached out and gently tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, his fingers lingering on my cheek. His touch was like a brand, searing my skin. "Tell me to go," he whispered. "Tell me you don't feel this, and I'll walk away right now." I looked into his eyes, and I saw my own hunger reflected back at me. I saw the promise of the wildfire I had been craving, and in that moment, Daniel, with his steady flame and his predictable love, felt like a distant memory, a life I had read about in a book. I didn't tell him to go. I leaned forward and kissed him. His lips were firm and demanding, nothing like Daniel's gentle, familiar kisses. His hands were in my hair, on my back, pulling me closer, and I melted into him, surrendering to the storm. It was desperate and hurried and achingly beautiful there on the floor of the studio, surrounded by the tools of our trade. It was reckless and wrong, and it was the most alive I had felt in years. Afterward, we lay tangled together, the cold floor hard against my back. I stared up at the ceiling, my body still trembling, and I felt a wave of emotion so complex I couldn't untangle it. There was exhilaration, yes, a wild, giddy rush. There was also shame, a deep, nauseating shame that coiled in my stomach. And underneath it all, there was a terrifying sense of freedom. I had done it. I had crossed the line. I had shattered the perfect picture of my life, and there was no putting the pieces back together. The affair with Julian became the center of my existence. The rest of my life, my job, my friends, my relationship with Daniel became the facade, the performance I had to maintain. I became a master of compartmentalization. During the day, I was Elena, the competent creative director. In the evenings, I was Daniel's loving girlfriend, helping him with dinner, listening to him talk about his projects, curling up next to him on the couch to watch a movie, and in the stolen hours between, in hotel rooms and in the back of Julian's car. I was someone else entirely. I was a woman possessed by passion, reckless and uninhibited, living entirely in the moment. Julian was everything Daniel wasn't. He was unpredictable, moody, and intensely passionate. He would show up at my office unannounced just to steal a kiss in the stairwell. He would send me cryptic text messages in the middle of the night, poems and fragments of thoughts that left me breathless. He didn't want to build a future with me, he wanted to consume me in the present. And I let him. I craved the instability, the uncertainty, the feeling of being on the edge of something dangerous. But the double life took its toll. The lies became more elaborate, more exhausting to maintain. I started to forget small details where I had told Daniel I would be, what excuse I had used. I became irritable and distracted, jumping at unexpected sounds, my mind constantly racing, trying to stay one step ahead of discovery. Daniel, sweet, trusting Daniel, noticed the change. He would ask me if I was okay, if something was wrong at work, if I was feeling unwell. I would brush him off with vague reassurances, and he would accept them, because it never occurred to him that I might be capable of deceit. His trust in me was so complete, so absolute, that it became the most painful part of my betrayal. One night, Daniel surprised me. He came home from work early with a bottle of my favorite wine and a small velvet box. My heart stopped when I saw it. He got down on one knee in our living room, the late afternoon sun casting a warm glow around him, and he told me that I was the best thing that had ever happened to him, that he couldn't imagine his life without me, that he wanted to spend forever by my side. He opened the box to reveal a beautiful diamond ring, simple and elegant, perfectly suited to the life we had built together. I looked at him, at his open, honest face, at the love shining in his eyes, and I felt the ground give way beneath me. This was the moment I had been unconsciously dreading. This was the moment where my two lives were supposed to collide. I should have said yes. A part of me, the part that still loved him, that still cherished the quiet comfort of our life together, wanted to say yes. But another part of me, the part that belonged to Julian, recoiled at the thought. Saying yes would be a final, irrevocable commitment to the life I was slowly strangling. Tears streamed down my face, and I let him believe they were tears of joy. I threw my arms around him and whispered yes against his neck, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. He slid the ring onto my finger, and it felt heavy, like a shackle. That night, while Daniel slept peacefully beside me, his arm draped protectively over my waist, I stared at the ceiling and made a decision. I couldn't go on like this. The guilt was consuming me. I had to end it with Julian. I had to choose, and I chose Daniel. I chose the safe, predictable love that had been my home for years. I chose the future he was offering me, a future I had convinced myself I wanted. The next day, I met Julian in our usual place, a nondescript hotel near his apartment. I hadn't told him about the engagement. I was wearing the ring, hidden in my pocket, its weight a constant reminder of my promise. "We need to talk," I said the moment he opened the door. He was shirtless, his hair still wet from a shower, and he looked so beautiful, so alive, that my resolve almost crumbled. He pulled me inside and tried to kiss me, but I turned my head away. "Julian, stop. please. I can't do this anymore." He stepped back, his expression shifting from desire to confusion, then to a guarded wariness. "What are you talking about, us? It's over. I'm engaged." I pulled the ring from my pocket and held it up, as if it were proof of my conviction. He stared at the ring, then at me, his jaw tightening. "Engaged," he repeated, his voice flat. "To him, yes. To Daniel. I love him, Julian. I've always loved him. This what we had, it was a mistake. A beautiful, terrible mistake, but a mistake nonetheless. I have to end it." For a long moment, he just looked at me, his dark eyes unreadable. I expected anger, recriminations, a scene. But what I got was worse. He laughed. It was a short, harsh sound devoid of humor. "A mistake," he echoed. "Is that what you're calling it? You think you can just walk away, put this little detour behind you, and go back to your perfect little life?" "It's not perfect," I said, my voice shaking, "but it's my life, and I need to fight for it." He walked towards me, slowly, until he was standing just inches away. He reached out and traced a finger along my collarbone, a gesture that was both intimate and menacing. "You don't get it, do you, Elena?" he whispered. "This wasn't just a mistake. This was you, the real you, the you that you've been hiding from him, from yourself. You think you can just put that back in the box?" His words hit me like a physical blow. They echoed the very fears I had been trying so desperately to suppress. "I have to try," I whispered, my voice breaking. I turned and walked out of the room, out of the hotel, out of his life. I didn't look back. I couldn't. If I had looked back, I would have seen the truth in his eyes, and I would have run back into his arms. The weeks that followed were a blur of forced normalcy. I threw myself into wedding planning with a manic energy that Daniel mistook for enthusiasm. I let him believe that my occasional tears were from the stress of it all, or from happiness. He was so relieved, so happy to have me back, that he didn't question the shadows under my eyes or the way I sometimes flinched when he touched me. We were play-acting, both of us, though only one of us knew it. I thought about Julian constantly. His face would appear in my mind at the most unexpected moments, while I was tasting wedding cakes, while I was choosing floral arrangements, while I was lying in Daniel's arms at night. I missed him with a physical ache, a longing that felt like withdrawal. I missed the passion, the danger, the feeling of being truly seen by someone who wanted nothing from me but the moment. I tried to convince myself that it would fade, that time would heal the wound, that the safe, steady love I had chosen would eventually be enough. But it wasn't enough. It would never be enough. The affair had cracked me open, and I had seen a version of myself that I couldn't unsee. I was not the woman Daniel believed me to be. I was someone capable of great passion and great betrayal. Someone who could lie to the man she loved without blinking. Someone who craved the fire even as it burned her. The guilt, which I had hoped would lessen, only grew stronger. It was a living thing, a parasite that fed on every kind word Daniel spoke, every loving gesture he made. Every time he told me he loved me, I heard the echo of my own lies. Every time he kissed me, I tasted the ghost of Julian's lips. I was drowning in my own deceit, and the man who was trying to save me was the very one who was pulling me under. The wedding was set for the first Saturday in June, a beautiful, sun-drenched day that should have been the happiest of my life. I stood in front of the mirror in my white dress, my hair perfectly styled, my makeup flawless, and I stared at the stranger looking back at me. She looked like a bride, but her eyes were empty. They were the eyes of someone who had already given herself away. The ceremony was held in a small garden filled with friends and family, all of them smiling, all of them believing in the fairy tale. I walked down the aisle on my father's arm, my gaze fixed on Daniel at the altar. He was so handsome in his suit, his eyes shining with tears of joy. He looked at me as if I were the answer to every prayer he had ever whispered. And I loved him. I did. I loved him with a love that was real and true. But it was a love that had been poisoned, a love that could no longer sustain me. The vows we exchanged were the worst part. I spoke the words, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part. And each word felt like a nail being hammered into my own coffin. I was making a promise I knew, with every fiber of my being, I could not keep. As we were pronounced husband and wife, and Daniel leaned in to kiss me, I closed my eyes. And in that moment, it wasn't Daniel's face I saw behind my eyelids. It was Julian's. The reception was a blur of champagne, congratulations, and forced smiles. smiles. I danced with Daniel, I posed for pictures, I cut the cake, all while feeling completely disconnected from my own body. I was an actress in a play, delivering my lines with perfect precision, but feeling nothing. It was late in the evening, the party in full swing, when I saw him. He was standing at the edge of the garden, partially hidden by the shadow of a large oak tree. He was wearing a dark suit, and he was watching me with an intensity that made my blood run cold. Julian, he had come. My heart lurched into my throat. I excused myself from a conversation with Daniel's and walked towards the house, my legs trembling. I didn't look back at the tree. I didn't need to. I knew he would follow. I slipped into the quiet of the house, the music and laughter fading behind me. I stood in the darkened living room, my back to the door, waiting. I heard the soft click of the door opening and closing, and then I felt his presence behind me. "You look beautiful," he said, his voice low and familiar. I turned to face him. He was even more striking than I remembered, the shadows playing across his sharp features. "Why are you here, Julian?" "I had to see you," he said, taking a step closer. "I had to see if you could really go through with it. If you could really marry him and pretend that we never happened." "I didn't pretend," I whispered. "I tried to forget." "And did you?" he asked, his eyes searching mine. "Did you forget the way you felt when you were with me? Did you forget who you were?" I couldn't answer him. The truth was written all over my face. He moved closer still, until he was close enough to touch. "I haven't forgotten, Elena. I think about you every single moment. I think about your laugh, your skin, the way you say my name. You think you can build a life on a lie. You think this." He gestured towards the window, towards the party beyond, "is real. It has to be," I said, my voice breaking. "I chose this. I chose him. You chose fear," he corrected me gently. "You chose safety. But that's not who you are. You're a woman who craves life, Elena. Real life, not this performance." He reached out and took my hand, the one with the wedding ring on it. He looked down at it, his thumb tracing the band. "This ring," he said softly, "is a cage. And you're the bird who was never meant to be caged." His words unleashed something inside me. All the suppressed longing, the guilt, the desperate unhappiness I had been trying so hard to bury came flooding to the surface. Tears spilled down my cheeks. "I don't know what to do," I sobbed. "I don't know who I am anymore." He pulled me into his arms, and I went willingly, burying my face in his chest, inhaling his familiar scent. It felt like coming home to a place I had never truly left. "Come with me," he whispered into my hair. "Right now. Leave all of this behind. Let's just go." And in that moment, in the darkness of the house where I had just pledged my life to another man, with the sound of my own wedding celebration floating in through the windows, I made my choice. I looked up at Julian, into his eyes that held no promises of forever, only the burning intensity of now, and I nodded. We slipped out of the house through the back door, into the night. I didn't leave a note. I didn't say goodbye. I simply walked away from my husband on our wedding day, my white dress trailing through the grass, my hand clasped tightly in another man's. The drive was a blur of street lights and shadows. Julian's car was fast and low to the ground, and we tore through the night as if we were being chased, which, in a way, we were. He didn't ask where we were going, and I didn't care. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of peace, a release from the unbearable tension of living a lie. We ended up at his apartment, the same place where so many of our stolen moments had been spent. It felt different now, charged with the finality of my decision. He led me inside, and without a word, he began to undress me slowly, deliberately, removing the layers of silk and lace that belonged to the bride I had just been. He unzipped my dress and let it pull at my feet, and I stepped out of it, out of that lie, leaving it in a heap on his floor. That night, there was no guilt, no hesitation. There was only the two of us, lost in each other, finally free from the constraints of secrecy. It was passionate and desperate and raw, a reaffirmation of the connection that had bound us together from the very beginning. When I finally fell asleep in his arms, I felt, for the first time in years, truly at peace. I woke to the pale light of dawn filtering through his blinds, and the taste of salt on my lips, tears I didn't remember crying, and the cold, empty space beside me where he should have been. At first, I thought he had just gone to get coffee, or maybe he was in the bathroom. I lay there waiting, a slow, creeping dread beginning to coil in my stomach. The apartment was too quiet. I called out his name. No answer. I got up, wrapping the sheet around myself, and walked through the small apartment. The living room was empty. The kitchen was empty. His cameras were gone from their usual spot on the shelf. His suitcase, which had always been half unpacked in the corner, was gone. A wave of nausea washed over me, and then I saw it. On the small table by the door, there was a single piece of paper folded in half. My name was written on it in his sharp, angular handwriting. I picked it up with trembling hands and unfolded it. The note was short. It said, "Elena, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have come for you. This was a mistake. Not you. Not us, but this ending. I'm not the man who stays. I never was. You knew that, I think, deep down. You chose the fire, but you forgot that fire consumes everything in the end. I can't be what you need me to be. I can't be the man you left your husband for. That's too much weight for someone like me to carry. I'm already gone. Please don't try to find me. For your own sake, go back. Maybe he'll forgive you. Maybe you can rebuild something from the ashes. That's what you're good at, isn't it? Building beautiful things from nothing. Go build your life, Elena. Just don't build it around me, Jay." I read the note 3 times, the words blurring through my tears. The man I had left everything for, the man who had promised me passion and freedom, had abandoned me in the cold light of dawn. He had taken what he wanted and disappeared, leaving me with nothing but the wreckage of my life. I sank to the floor, the sheet pulling around me, and I let out a sound that was not quite a sob and not quite a scream. It was the sound of a woman realizing the full, catastrophic weight of her choices. I had traded a life of quiet, steady love for a fleeting moment of passion, and I had lost everything. I had lost Daniel, the best man I had ever known. I had lost my home, my future, my sense of self. And for what? For a man who had seen me not as a partner, but as an adventure, a story he could add to his collection. I sat there on his cold floor for what felt like hours, the note crumpled in my fist. The sun climbed higher in the sky, the city waking up outside the window, oblivious to the implosion of my world. I thought about Daniel. I pictured him at the reception, realizing I was gone. I pictured the confusion, the worry, the dawning horror. I pictured his face, that beautiful, trusting face, when he finally understood what I had done. The pain I had caused him was a physical ache in my own chest. The urge to go back to beg for his forgiveness was overwhelming. Julian's note had suggested it, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Go back, maybe he'll forgive you. But even as the thought formed, I knew it was impossible. There was no going back from this. You cannot unsay the vows you break hours after making them. You cannot unsee the image of your bride walking away in her wedding dress, hand in hand with another man. I had not just broken Daniel's heart, I had annihilated it. I had taken everything he believed in and shattered it into a million pieces. Some things are beyond forgiveness. Some wounds don't heal. Eventually, I forced myself to move. I found my dress still lying in a heap on the floor. It was creased and dirty, a sad, crumpled symbol of the fairy tale that had died before it could even begin. I put it on, feeling like a ghost wearing the clothes of a dead woman. I left the apartment, closing the door softly behind me on that chapter of my life. I didn't go home. I couldn't face that apartment with its shared memories and its silent accusations. Instead, I went to my mother's house, a small cottage in the suburbs. She opened the door, her face etched with confusion and concern. She had been at the wedding. She must have heard. "Elena?" she said, her eyes taking in my disheveled state, my ruined dress. "What happened? Where's Daniel? Everyone's been looking for you." I just looked at her, unable to form the words that would explain the inexplicable, and then I collapsed into her arms, sobbing as the full, devastating reality of what I had done finally crashed over me. The weeks that followed were a waking nightmare. The calls from Daniel, which I couldn't answer. The voicemails, which I couldn't bring myself to delete. The first one was confused, worried. "Elena, where are you? Are you okay? Please call me." The second was more frantic. "Something's wrong. I know it. Just tell me you're safe." The third was heartbroken, the voice of a man whose world had just ended. "I saw you, with him, at the wedding. I saw you leave. Why? Elena, why? I had no answer for him. There was no answer that could ever be enough. I had done the unforgivable, and the only thing I could do now was let him go. I never responded to his messages. I changed my phone number. I disappeared from his life as completely as Julian had disappeared from mine. It was the only kindness I had left to offer him, the kindness of my absence. The scandal was swift and brutal. Our friends took sides, most of them siding with Daniel, as they should have. I was the villain of the story, the bride who ran, the woman who destroyed a good man. I lost my job, not officially, but the whispers and the stares made it impossible to stay. I became a pariah in my own life. A cautionary tale whispered about at parties I would never attend again. I moved out of the city, to a small town on the coast where no one knew my name. I found a tiny apartment above a bookstore and took a job as a waitress in a quiet cafe. I lived a small, anonymous life, trying to outrun the ghosts of my past. But the ghosts were not in the places I lived, they were inside me. I thought about Daniel constantly. I wondered if he was okay, if he had found someone new, if he ever thought about me with anything other than bitterness and pain. I hoped with all my heart that he had. I hoped he had found someone who deserved him, someone who would cherish the steady flame of his love instead of trying to extinguish it. I thought about Julian, too, though with a different kind of ache. The anger at his abandonment had faded, replaced by weary acceptance. He had been honest with me in his own way. He had never promised me forever. He had only promised me the moment. And I had been so desperate for the fire that I had mistaken a spark for the sun. He was a man who took what he wanted and moved on. And I had been foolish enough to believe I could be the exception. Most of all, I thought about myself. The woman I had been, the woman I had become, the woman I might still be. The affair and its aftermath had stripped me bare, leaving me face to face with my own reflection. And I didn't like what I saw. I saw a woman capable of great love and great cruelty. A woman who had let her own restless hunger destroy not only her own happiness, but the happiness of the man who loved her most. The restlessness, that old familiar ghost, was still with me, but it had changed. It was no longer a hunger for something more, it was a hollow ache for something lost. I had sought the wildfire, and it had burned me alive. Now I was left with the ashes and the long, slow work of sifting through them to see if anything could be salvaged. One evening, about a year after the wedding, I was closing up the cough when I found a letter in my apron pocket. It was a plain white envelope with no return address, just my name written in a handwriting I didn't recognize. I opened it with trembling fingers, my heart pounding. Inside was a single photograph. It was a picture of a wedding. Not a grand affair, but a small, intimate ceremony on a beach. The bride was laughing, her head thrown back, her hair blowing in the wind. The groom was looking at her with an expression of such pure, uncomplicated love that it made my chest ache. It was Daniel. He looked happy. He looked at peace. He looked like a man who had finally found what he had been searching for. There was no note, no message, just the photograph. But it spoke volumes. It was his way of telling me he was okay. It was his way of saying goodbye. I held the photograph for a long time, tracing the outline of his face with my fingertip. Tears streamed down my cheeks, but for the first time in a year, they were not entirely tears of grief. They were tears of release. He had moved on. He had found a happiness he deserved. The chains of guilt that had bound me so tightly began to loosen just a little. I never found out who sent the photograph. I like to think it was him, a final act of kindness from a man who had always been too good for me. Or maybe it was a friend, someone who knew I needed to see it, needed to know that the man I had broken had somehow managed to put himself back together. That night, I walked down to the beach near my apartment and stood at the water's edge. The photograph tucked safely in my pocket. The moon was full, casting a silver path across the dark water. I thought about the woman I had been, the choices I had made, the lives I had shattered. I thought about Daniel, and I wished him well with all my heart. I thought about Julian, and I let him go, finally and completely. And I thought about myself. The restlessness was still there, but it was quieter now. It no longer felt like a hunger for something outside myself. It felt like a question I was still learning to answer. Who was I, if not the woman defined by her mistakes? What kind of life could I build from the ashes? I didn't have the answers yet. Maybe I never would. But standing there on the beach, with the salt spray on my lips and the moon lighting my way, I felt, for the first time in a very long time, a tiny spark of something that felt like hope. It was a fragile thing, easily extinguished, but it was there. It was the beginning of forgiveness. The first small step toward towards learning to live with the woman I had been, and the woman I was still trying to become. The taste of salt on my lips that night was not from tears. It was from the sea, a reminder that even the deepest wounds can eventually be washed clean, and that from the ruins of a life, something new, however small, can still begin to grow.